The time has come.
I like that.
The time is now for Victoria Stilwell's Positively Podcast. She's a world-renowned dog trainer.
Seen enough dogs today, have you?
She's the host of It's Me or the Dog.
I'm coming to train you.
Along with co-host Holly Furfer.
You don't play around with that name, do you?
I am a fan of sweaty balls.
She's Victoria Stilwell, and she's ready to go.
This is a lovely way to start the day.
You get the busy bee. I need to trim her whiskers.
I see some poo here.
I feel a little bit better now because I'm the only one who usually feels stupid during the podcast.
Now, let's head to the studio and get this Positively Podcast started.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. Holly is not going to be with us today. She is hard at work, but I promise you she will be back in future podcasts. Today we do have a very special guest. Her name is Sarah Heath. She's a veterinary behaviorist from the UK. She will be speaking at my dog behavior conference, April the 16th to 18th. It is virtual, so it doesn't matter where in the world you are. Please register and you'll have 3 days of incredible information. Sarah is going to be talking about, spay and neuter. Do you or do you not? What age? Do you spay the females and neuter the males? Which one would you do? Which one would you not do? Oh my gosh, this is, good luck to her is all I can say. But she's brave enough to take on the subject. And I think it's information that a lot of people need to know. But today, what we are going to be talking about is the latest incident with poor old Major Biden. Major Biden, 3-year-old German Shepherd, who is President Biden's dog and has been with the Bidens for a while. But because of being relocated to the White House, there have been a couple of incidents where he has nipped. First time was about 6 weeks ago, a little bit longer than that, where he nipped at a Secret Service member, a new person. And then he was relocated back to the family's home in Delaware, received some training, and then came back about 10 days ago. Well, unfortunately, we just heard that there's been another nipping incident while he was being walked. And I thought that this is an absolutely perfect time to have Sarah Heath here to talk about this. She's the perfect person to talk about this. Because I have been seeing a lot of advice on social media of people saying, well, Major Biden needs leadership. He needs to know who is alpha. He needs some discipline. He needs good obedience training. And I am hoping that the Bidens, or at least some of the Biden family, or maybe some members of the White House, or whoever is with the dog on a regular basis, will listen to this podcast because you don't want to miss it. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, Victoria. Lovely to see you again. Missing you here in the UK and doing our courses over here.
I know. Well, do you know what? I mean, thank goodness, because of vaccinations, the time will be soon where we'll be able to travel again and get over to England. But I do miss it there. I really do. And so, yes, I'm excited to when we can get together again. But I'm also excited to have you on here because, you've seen the news, you know what's transpired. Of course, we don't exactly know what occurred before, during, and after the incident. Was it just a nip? Did it scrape skin? Did it bruise? There's so much misinformation out there. But, I think I'd like to talk in general terms about transitioning dogs into new environments. Of course, Major Biden has extra challenges because it is the White House, because his parents, as it were, the president and the first lady, are extremely busy. They are amazing dog owners, as I've heard, but they are extremely busy. And so we will tackle that. But, transitioning dogs and thinking about it from their point of view.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to say to start with is this can't be advice about him specifically, because you cannot give advice about a case unless you've seen the dog and you've talked to the caregivers directly and actually investigated in full exactly what's happening. So I guess that's where you have to start. What we can talk about is the emotional health of dogs and the fact that behavior comes from a combination of your emotions and your cognition. So what you've learned about things, which is your cognitive ability, and then how you feel about things through your emotional states, and that is exactly the same in dogs as it is in human animals or in other species as well, cats, horses, etc. So I guess what's important is to actually look at the fact that this dog, this particular dog, has been engaged in some incident. Sadly, we don't know what, because we weren't there, we didn't see it, we don't actually know what happened, but there has been an incident as we understand it. And so if there has been an incident, behavior has occurred, then the question is, why did it happen? And that is the most important question. So we need more information in this particular case. We need to know, when did it happen? Where did it happen? With whom did it happen? Because behavior is contextual. Behavior happens in a context. And you can't say, this dog has nipped someone, and I saw a dog last week that nipped someone, I'm going to do the same thing, because it's not the same dog, it's not the same place, there isn't such a thing as a generic advice for that incident, because the incident is unique and the incident has happened in a context. So that's the most important thing to say before we get into the more generic discussion, which I'd love to do with you, in terms of emotional health, what emotional health is and why it's important, and why a dog that is transitioning, so has come from one environment, is now living in a completely different environment, why that might be relevant in terms of their behavior changing.
Well, let's start with emotional health first. Why do we need to look at that? Because again, a lot of the advice that people have been giving, and it's not just for Major Biden, but also, in general terms, is that as I've already alluded to, that this dog needs more obedience training, he needs more leadership, he needs more training. Right. It seems like everyone's sort of missing the point that the emotional health of the dog is extremely important, and that needs to be the focus first.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a vet, my basis of why I'm involved in behavioral medicine is that I work on the basis of the health triad. Now, the health triad is talked about in human medicine, but talked about less so in veterinary medicine. And that basically what that means is every individual has three equally important components to their healthcare. One is their physical health, and that's what you probably think about when you think about a vet or you think about a human doctor. But also it's about your emotional health and your cognitive health. The emotion is the drives that our bodies react to, which lead to behavioral output. And cognition is the way we've learned how to develop that. So what you're saying is that people have immediately gone, this is cognitive. He hasn't learned to do anything different. We need to teach him. But cognition is 1/3 of your health. And behavioral responses are generated, first of all, by your emotional drives, the reason why you need to achieve something, combined with your physical health. Now, I don't know how old Major is.
He's 3 years old.
Okay, but he is a German Shepherd dog. And so we would also look at, is there anything that could potentially physically be involved here as well? So we can't ignore physical health. So things like conformational reasons why there may be discomfort, those sorts of things. So I'm not saying for him specifically, but we know that there's a very strong link between the presence of discomfort and chronic pain and behavioral output, and not just in the ways that people think in terms of, if you're in pain and someone touched the sore bit, you might bite them. It's far, far more complex than that. And it's about the fact that pain is an emotion as well as being a physical thing. So there's an emotional component to it. It takes away some of your capacity, which maybe we'll talk about in a minute, but your emotional capacity is filled up with pain or discomfort. So a physical health check obviously is absolutely crucial as the first thing that you always do. But in terms of what is emotional health is basically based on the work of an Estonian biologist called Jaak Panksepp. I don't know if your viewers are familiar with him, but he created this model of the systems involved in emotions, of which we have those which are engaging, so the ones that create us to go towards things and engage with things, and those that are protective, that help us to protect ourselves or our resources or our environment from potential threats. So we've got these two types of emotional drives. Now, Panksepp actually uses the terms negative and positive. So he calls the ones where you engage with things positive and the ones where you protect yourself negative. In my model, the SYNC model of emotional health, I talk about them as engaging and protective. The reason I use different terminology is in English, there's unfortunately a tendency to think that as soon as you use the word negative, that you mean bad. Now, we've got to remember that negative emotions are not bad emotions. They're absolutely essential emotions for survival. So I call them protective emotions rather than negative emotions, to give them a functional title. Like, why do we have them? We have them to protect ourselves or our resources or our environment. Does that make sense?
Well, it's very important. I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but it is extremely important that, you know, these they keep us safe.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
if we weren't fearful about things, if we weren't fearful about crossing the road and thinking we might get run over, we would just cross the road without looking and we would get run over. So fear is adaptive.
Exactly. And the emotional systems that Panksepp outlines are all normal, absolutely normal, functional, important for survival. What happens, though, unfortunately, for all animals, including human animals, is that life can take its toll on us in terms of the experiences we have or don't have. And we need to remember what we don't experience can sometimes be as significant as what we do experience in terms of our emotional health. So these things have their input on our emotions, and sometimes the emotional states become abnormal. A bit like physical health can become abnormal, but also emotional health can become abnormal. We can become outside of our adaptive forms of those emotions, and the emotions can start to be they're protective in nature, but because they're being triggered in an abnormal context, or in a context in which the perception of danger is just that, it's a perception, not a reality, then it becomes maladaptive, because now you're protecting yourself when actually there's nothing to protect yourself from. What you're protecting yourself from is either completely absent, so we call that anxiety, where you're worrying about the potential for there to be something to worry about, or it's something you perceive as threatening that actually isn't threatening, and then it's an abnormal form of fear. So these emotions are absolutely normal as long as they're in the right context. And then we come back to, when you're diagnosing what a problem is and why a problem has occurred, you must know the context. If you tell me, you know, whether it's Major Biden or any other dog, if you just come to me and say, I've got a dog and it nips someone, what shall I do? I have over 30 years experience of working in behavioral medicine, and I would go, I don't know. I have no idea. Tell me, where was the dog? When did it happen? Who was there? What happened just before? What happened just after? What was his body language like? What did the body language tell you about his emotional state? I need to know all of that before I can give you advice as to what to do about it, because in order to change an emotion, you need to know, why did it happen in the first place? What was the reasoning? And I don't mean necessarily cognitive reasoning, but what was the reasoning in that dog at that moment? What was the reason for that nip? They don't just occur for no reason. The behavior happened because of a combination of events, potentially, possibly cognition, possibly something about what he's learned in the past, but also about how he was feeling at that moment and how he perceived what was happening. And it may not be something intentional. It may be something completely innocuous and innocent on the part of the human who was there at the time, but what the dog perceived, that's what led to the incident, and that's what we need to understand in order to give advice.
Now, the Major especially, as happens with most dogs that nip and or bite, they are labeled as aggressive dogs. So Major Biden is already, I mean, all of the media out there is calling him an aggressive dog. And there are some people that are in the media that are calling him a nasty dog, that this is nasty behavior. So again, can we just dispel those labels?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what all we know is this dog has done something, that's an incident has happened. At the moment, we don't know what his motivation for that was. We don't know what his reasoning in his head at that moment was. As far as I know, no one sat down with the caregivers and also the person who was with him at the time, so not just the caregivers, but the person who was actually with him, and found out what exactly happened and what was around and what had happened before in the incident. But also we need the caregivers there as well. So you said his caregivers are very busy, but they need to take time out from their busyness and sit down with someone and actually talk to them, because they are the ones who can fill in the gaps of what's happened before. So what is the background? How does he react to other situations? What are the triggers that cause behavioural change in other ways? Not necessarily nipping, but what does he do? What does he enjoy doing? So what floats his engaging emotions? What drives his engaging emotions? What drives his protective emotions? What things is he worried about? What things bother him? We need to know who this dog is. And isn't that just the same as a person? So we could say, a person hit somebody. Okay, that in itself, you would say, is an unwanted behavior. We don't want people to hit other people, generally, in a generic sense. But do we say that a human being who has hit someone is inherently a bad person, a nasty person, an aggressive person? I don't know, because I don't know why they hit that other person. I don't know what happened just before. I know that hitting is a behavior we do not want to see, and nipping is a behavior we do not want to see in dogs. But before I can talk to that person who's hit someone and change their behavior, so the next time they're in that context they don't hit, I need to understand why they did it. Was it justified? Was their perception of the fact that they felt threatened and needed to defend themselves, was that a justified feeling at that time? So they may have hit the person because they were trying to steal their handbag at that moment. Is that person who hit the handbag snatcher a nasty person? Are they an aggressive individual? Not necessarily. They may have been a frightened individual, feeling that their valuable resource was about to be withdrawn from them, and they were acting in a defensive manner. Equally, it could be that there's another explanation, but it's too simplistic to say we see a behavior we don't like and we label the individual as being a bad individual.
Could you talk a little bit about the emotional sink? Because I think it's really vital for people to understand. And I think the way that you put it makes it very easy for people to understand.
Okay, so the concept, this is the model I developed in about 2010, and it's the sink analogy for understanding companion animal emotional health. The idea is that the sink has two potential inputs. So we've got two taps going into the sink. They represent what I just talked about, the engaging or the protective emotion. So I liken that to a cold tap for protective and a hot tap for the cold tap for the engaging and the hot tap for the protective. It's easy if I've got a diagram in front of me. And so when we experience something, let's take my caregiver throws a ball for me if I'm a dog. As that ball is thrown, my cold tap gets turned on, because desire seeking, which is the emotion that drives me to engage with that ball and run after it, is triggered by the ball being thrown. So you throw the ball, you turn on the cold tap. Or on the other tap, if I see a car coming towards me and I experience the protective emotion of fear, anxiety, that turns on the hot tap and in comes some emotion into my sink. So that's the input. And of course, it's not quite that simple. We've got a mixer tap. So we can sometimes have some cold and some hot come in at the same time. So that would be a dog, say a dog enjoys social company with people in general, is a sociable dog. So when they see a person, the cold tap, the engaging emotion, gets turned on. So we turn on the cold, engaging emotion, and that starts to come into the sink. But the person they've just seen is someone they don't know. So they're a little bit wary because they have no information about this person. So at the same time, their protective tap is also turned on with some anxiety. So at that moment, we've got two emotional inputs, both happening at the same time, both justified at the moment, as far as we know. I don't know this person from Adam. It's okay to be slightly anxious. That could be absolutely adaptive. But I'm a dog and I like people, so I'm also engaging as well. Okay. And then that's coming into this sink. And the sink is basically your capacity. How much emotional input can you as an individual handle? How much can you cope with? So the top of the sink is like your coping threshold. If that water goes above that coping threshold, it's going to flood. It's going to pour over the top. And now I've got a problem because my sink isn't man enough, it isn't big enough for the input that's coming. And so we now get into what we call arousal. So arousal, emotional, in technical terms, emotional valence is the type of emotion, and emotional arousal is the amount of the emotion. Okay, so the amount of water in the sink is the emotional arousal. So that then starts to fill up, and depending on how big your sink is in relation to your input, you're going to be more or less at risk of flooding. Okay, but there's another component, which is the sink also has an outlet pipe, a drainage pipe. So there is the potential for this emotion, once it's been utilized, to be dissipated, to go out through the outlet pipe. So if the balance is good, so what comes in is in good proportion to the size of the sink and the drainage, then you're never going to fill your sink up. It's always going to have capacity in it for the next thing that happens. But one of three things can go wrong. Either your drainage is blocked, so you can't get rid of the emotion, or the amount of emotion is excessive, it's coming in too quickly, or there's too much of it, or your sink is very small. Any of those three things is going to cause you a problem. So if we take a rescue dog, which I understand the dog you started talking about I understand he's not lived with these caregivers since he was a puppy. So if he's had other experiences, one thing we don't know is how big his sink is, because the sink is made up, if you like, of your genetics, of your early rearing, and of ultimately your experiences creates that capacity. So if he's got a tiny sink, and then by going into a novel environment, his protective emotions have been heightened because he's more anxious, because he doesn't understand. He's with a stranger. He doesn't know this person. And he also maybe is having a lot of inflow. It's a busy place with lots of things changing. So it could well be that actually the incident is the tip of the iceberg. The incident is not actually I'm not saying it shouldn't be dealt with, but that might not be the problem. The problem might be that he's not getting enough sleep. Sleep is a drainage behavior. You need enough sleep to dissipate emotion. Maybe he doesn't get enough opportunity to chew on things. That's another drainage behavior. Maybe he also has a lot of input, lots of new novel things happening that are increasing his inflow. And maybe he has a small sink because of his background, which I don't know anything about. But if any of those three things are compromised, then unfortunately the individual's at risk of flooding.
I think that's exactly what has happened if you think about any kind of overwhelming environment. When any dog is transitioned to an overwhelming environment, be it a new home, be it visiting family, visiting or having friends over, or taking your dog somewhere, to the vet, to the groomers, to the cafe, to, I don't know, a county show. When you're taking a dog from something that they understand, that is familiar to them and safe, and you're putting them in a situation that is overwhelming. Yeah,
two things are happening. Not only are you increasing the inflow, So more taps the taps are turned on by more things. So there's more coming in. But you're possibly also creating a bias towards that protective emotion because it's new and it's novel, and therefore you're more likely to be protective. And we talk in humans about being optimistic or pessimistic, and that is basically your bias of emotional health. Are you primarily motivated by your engaging emotions or by your protective emotions? And if you put an individual into a novel environment, somewhere they have no reference points, nothing familiar, nothing that they can identify with, then you shift them towards a protective emotional bias because of the fact that there's more to be concerned about. And the reason I talk about the protective emotions as being the hot tap and the engaging emotions being the cold tap is taking the sink analogy. If you have a sink that's full of cold water, it will still flood and make a terrible mess. But if you have a sink that's full of hot water and it floods, not only do you have the terrible mess, but you may also get burned. So we've got two emotions. You can have emotional difficulty because you have excessive amounts of engaging emotion. It's not only protective emotions that cause problems, which goes back to why I don't use the word negative emotion, because it means it makes people think it's bad, and positive meaning good, because otherwise everyone goes, as long as it's positive emotion, everything's fine. No, because if you've got too much positive emotion and a really tiny sink or blocked drainage, you may actually be in problems and still not be emotionally stable, not be emotionally able to cope, even though everything that's happening to you is positive in terms of engaging you and creating that engaging emotion. That's about arousal being a problem.
I think it's very interesting that you also mentioned sleep. And sleep isn't something that people really think about. But it's because I've listened to you so much that I think about it a lot. And I do think about quality of sleep. I'm a light sleeper. My quality of sleep is not good. I know that when I don't sleep well, that I could be more moody during the day. It is harder for me to cope with things. And I feel much better when I have had a good night's sleep. And so thinking to Major Biden that he is in a different place, and then, his schedule is definitely different. His schedule has become unpredictable. And, you don't know who's coming in and out of the residence at all hours of the night, or what time the president gets up, or what time the first lady gets up to get an early flight to go here, there, and everywhere. So you have to think that his sleep, well, we don't know 100%, but we have to think that his schedule has been disrupted, that things are now not so predictable, and that maybe his sleep has been disturbed. And maybe that is one of the things that, well, it is certainly one of the things that anybody who is taking on this case needs to look at.
Yeah, and one of the things that also is important, you just talked about your sleep, Victoria, and whether you get a good night's sleep. We also need to think about species-specific differences, that dogs need 16 to 18 hours of sleep every 24 hours. Now, if you think an average human caregiver sleeps for 8 hours, and I'm guessing the President of the United States does not sleep that long every night, because I'm assuming they're quite busy. So basically, if you think, let's say he does get 8 hours a night, then that means that if this dog sleeps when their caregivers sleep, and that's an if, we don't know whether this dog sleeps when his caregivers are asleep, but if he does, say he gets 8 hours from that, he's got to get another 8 to 10 hours during the waking hours of the human beings. Can he get that living in an environment that's very, very busy, where lots is happening? And as you say, also, has his routine been completely changed? Did he have a routine when he lived in his other home where he did have periods for sleep during the day? Did he have, I don't know, walks at certain times in his previous life that is now not possible because they're in a more erratic lifestyle? We don't know any of this information. This is speculation, but what we're saying is that if someone is going to assist this dog and the dog needs help, he needs assistance, because his behavior at the moment, sadly, is not compatible with his lifestyle. So he can't carry on doing this. That's not compatible. So if someone's going to try and help him, They've got to sit down, as I said before, with the person who was there at the times of the incidents, but also with his caregivers, in order to really understand what is it from his point of view that has changed. Why is he showing this behavior? And I don't know. I don't follow your news like you do, but I understand from one of the things I read that he's described by his caregivers as that being out of character, of him being a very affectionate dog, a dog that fits well into family life. That's what I have heard. And if that is true, then there's a big question is, okay, so why now? Why is this happening now? There are other questions there, because the fact that he's described as being affectionate or loving may mean that actually he's an appeasing dog. So when we have protective emotions, we can react to them in 4 different ways, and repulsion, which the nipping would be an example, is only one of those. So it could be that the dog concerned, or any dog, is the repulsion is out of character, but actually when we take a proper history, when we do an actual consultation, we find out that yes, repulsion's unusual, this dog doesn't normally do that, but in situation where this dog is worried, he does have a tendency to be very inhibited. So he tends to just shut down and sit and freeze, or he has a tendency to move away. He tends to take himself out of the room, or he has a tendency to look away, or he has a tendency to become very, inverted commas, interactive, very needy. So he's appeasing when he's worried. So we may find, if we take a proper history, that actually there were signs that the dog had a slight bias towards his protective emotions, has been a bit of a worrier in the past, could be because of his background, but he's never used nipping before. And then it's like, well, why is he using nipping now then? His emotional state may be quite similar, but the method he's using to display that has changed. And that is where the context comes in. So you must get back to the context.
I think that there have been reports from staffers that he is a friendly dog, but he charges at them. And then once he knows you're okay, then there's those sort of affiliative behaviors. So it seems like, yes.
If we look at charging, that may be that actually this is a dog who, when he's in a social context, has that conflict I was talking about.
Yes.
And because of that conflict can lead you to try very hard to gather that information as quickly as possible. So if you take a human example of someone who is slightly anxious in a social setting, those people could behave in various different ways. They may avoid social settings altogether and not go there, but I'm sure we've all met people who are slightly anxious, who are very intense. So when they meet you, they go, "Oh, Victoria, hi, how are you? How many children have you got? Where do you live? How many dogs have you had before?" And there's lots and lots of, I need information. Tell me lots of stuff. Because the more I know about you, the safer I'm going to feel. Yeah. So if he charges at people, is it that he sees someone new and goes, "I need to know everything about you as quickly as possible"? And that's what drives him to do that, which then leads us to, how's his self-confidence? How self-confident is this dog? How anxious could this individual be? And does he actually demonstrate that in other contexts, but in different ways, which explain then what happened in the context of the actual incident? But we don't know any of this about this particular dog. We're talking generically about how we would investigate an individual dog who has shown a behaviour that is unwanted by the people around them, but is also reported to be out of character.
I could talk to you for hours, Sarah. We're coming to the end of this podcast. I know that there's going to be people out there that are going to say, well, what do you do? And I think a lot of the things that you have said regarding, you know, that the sleep is important, predictability is important, schedules are important. That we don't exactly know, but it seems like from what we've heard that it could be conflict behavior, that he is a worrier. And so, you know, what does this dog do moving forward? Do they move him back to his old home so that he can have a peaceful life? And that could be 8 years. We might re-elect Biden again for another 4 years. So that could be 8 years. And that's no way to live. The Bidens don't want to be separated from their dog. They can see them on weekends, but not during the week. So is that going to be workable? Or are there ways that this can work? And I believe that there are. I believe that, again, like you said, not knowing the particulars of the case, just what I've seen in the media, but also from experience that there are many things that can be put into place that will help.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is you need a diagnosis before you can give a treatment plan. I'm a vet and I don't treat anything without a diagnosis. So I need to know what the problem is. But once we have that, then certainly there are loads of things to explore. We need in basic terms, with an animal who has a flooding emotional sink, the thing we can change the least is the size of the sink, sadly. The size of the sink is the thing that has been determined by genetics and early rearing and learned experiences, etc. So that's the thing we can change the least. What we can change is the input. We can drastically change the input, and we can do that not only by trying to change the bias. So we can try and say, I want this dog to have a more engaging bias, but also we can turn the flow down. We can actually create less emotional input. And that might include turning down the cold tap as well. It's not all about the protective emotions. As I said, the arousal can come from either input. And we can increase the drainage. We can look at, can we improve his sleep? Can we improve his chewing behavior? Can we improve other things that he can do in order to relax? And I think one of the things as well, you started off by saying people are saying he needs leadership. Actually, what he needs is self-confidence. And if you
100%.
take the leadership all the time, if you go down the route of tell him what to do, actually that increases anxiety. If I can only do something when you instruct me to do it, then without the instruction, I'm more anxious, because I now haven't got the ability to create decisions for myself. So actually, the opposite is true, that the animal actually needs self-determination and self-confidence such that they can make the right decisions. And that's the same whether you're rearing a foal or a kitten or a child or a puppy. It doesn't matter what species it is. What it needs to be able to do is be emotionally intelligent. Emotional intelligence is when you're aware of your emotions, and when you can express your emotions, and when you can respond to them appropriately. And that goes back to, obviously not for the cases we're talking about, but prevention is absolutely crucial. It's how we breed and rear puppies. It's how we live with dogs in their development phases that determines whether or not they're likely to be emotionally stable and capable and able to live in what is our world. It's a human domestic world. It's not their world, and it is going to be challenging in terms of their species specific behaviors, because the world is run for people and they are being expected to live in a human existence, and therefore our responsibility is to prepare them for that so they can do that as successfully as possible.
You know what I hope, because, these are our first dogs and we want to see them be successful. And I do hope that the advice, if they do seek advice, they put you on a plane, Sarah, and bring you over.
Not at the moment with COVID, there are no planes.
You know, that's
planes.
fine. But that they take this advice, and it's not about teaching Major or any dog to learn more things, to do more things. It is about that self-confidence. It is about creating an environment where he has the freedom to explore and gain that confidence. And yes, all is not lost. There are so many ways, like Sarah said, there are so many ways that we can help dogs like Major Biden acclimate or acclimatize to new situations, whatever that situation is. And also understanding that it might not be the best place for him. Or at least because it's a very large place, then he might not be able to go everywhere that he's been allowed to go. But I think it's really important that the space, the environment is taken into account, because when you talk about prevention, that's what it's all about. A good transition protocol, as I call it, which does sound very boring, but does take into account, what the space is. How will the dog negotiate the space? How does the dog perceive the space? And how will the humans and dog live successfully within the space? And a lot of that is preventing these incident situations from occurring in the first place. Now, you can't, with hindsight's 2020, right? You can't, we can't go through everything and go, well, something could happen here and something could happen here, because then we're all going to go nuts. There are so many things that can be done. And so, I hope that they listen to this, Sarah, and I hope they do get great advice. But this hopefully will help them, set them on the path to success. And so for anybody who is transitioning their dog into a new home, I'm so glad that you've listened to this, and I hope that you've got a lot of really good information. And if you want to hear more what Sarah Heath has to say, then she will be speaking at the Dog Behavior Conference, April the 16th to the 18th. And I definitely encourage you to register. Any final words you want to say? Final sort of pearls, as my father would call nuggets of amazing information?
No, I guess to sum it up, when an incident happens and an individual is being labelled as being nasty, aggressive, whatever, has anyone actually asked the individual why it happened? What did they? I mean, it's a bit like being at school, isn't it? There's an incident in the playground. Do we just make a judgment on what we heard happened, or do we talk to both individuals and try and find out, what did you perceive was happening? What was your take on it at the time? What was motivating you to do that at the time? And it's taking that time to say, I need to understand this, and then we can help and move forward. So yeah, hopefully somebody will be able to help the individuals concerned to actually look at this from the animal's perspective and ask the animal what happened and why it happened, and go back to the basics of creating a self-confident individual who can make better decisions next time.
Sarah, thank you so much. I really look forward to seeing you and hearing you in April. And if people want to know more about, or where they could find you, where do they go?
My practice is called Behavioural Referrals Veterinary Practice. So if you Google that, you'll find our website. We're also on Facebook as well. So that's probably the best way through the practice, is to look up, put my name into Google. You'll probably find some contact details that way as well. But yeah, so the easiest thing is to look for the practice, Behavioural Referrals Veterinary Practice.
There's a reason why my students at VSA, Victoria Stillwell Academy, love you.
I enjoyed teaching there, and as I say, I'm looking forward to doing it in person in Wigan again.
Absolutely.
At some point in the future.
Absolutely. Let's hope. Next year, I think. I'm hope. All right, Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope that you are staying healthy and happy. Have a good week, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stillwell's Positively podcast. For more information, visit positively.com. Get connected on Facebook and YouTube as Victoria Stillwell, or follow her on Twitter @VictoriaS. Be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps to change dogs' lives positively.